Hello, everyone. Thank you for visiting my channel, Educational Norm. I work as an educational consultant, which means that I have the opportunity to interact and visit with many teachers across Ohio and beyond. Those interactions have driven me to tell their stories and their ideas on education. The goal of Educational Norm is to provide an informational network that focuses on positive aspects of education, the people preparing students for the future of our world. Join us each week for a new interview, and please subscribe and share the channel with others that you think may enjoy the program. Thank you and enjoy the show. So we have Erik Francis with us here today. Erik is an international author and presenter with over 25 years of experience working in education as a classroom teacher, a site administrator, and an education program specialist with State Education Agency, and a staff development trainer who produces and provides professional development, guidance, support, and services for teachers and school leaders. Erik is an author of Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, Posing Good Questions to Promote Student Inquiry, and Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, a method and a model for deeper teaching and learning, published by Solution Tree. He is also the author of That's a Good Question, How to Promote Cognitive Rigor Through Classroom Questioning, published by ASCD. He is ranked consistently as one of the world's top 30 educational professionals by research organization Global Gurus. He has also been named as one of the top global thought leaders in design thinking and future work by Thinkers 360. Erik, welcome to Educational Norm.
Thanks, Norm. Thanks for having me today, and I appreciate you inviting me on your forum to share.
Not a problem. And you're going to be part of my growth model. So hopefully they'll see your name and will say, hey, I want to hear more about Erik Francis. So I appreciate you coming on. Um, I've known of your work for quite a few years now, but I don't know your story of your educational path, your educational journey. Can
Mhm.
you share with us how you got to where you're at now?
Well, I never intended to be an educator. I wanted to work in the film industry. I wanted to be a screenwriter and a filmmaker and a producer. I did that for a couple of years, and when I turned 25, I decided to change my career and go into education. I've been a middle school and high school teacher, site administrator, worked at a state education agency, and around when I did that, people started putting a bug in my ear about consulting. And I had a family and I didn't want to just do that leap. So I got an anchor job at a local charter school out here, charter organization, and I consult on the side. And then 2012, I just flipped to where I was consulting full time. So I've been doing that since 2012. And in 2016, after being on the conference circuit a little bit and people seeing my presentations, I got my first book deal with ASCD and didn't write really for a couple of years. Then pandemic hit and I decided, okay, I need to do something. So that's when I wrote the DOK book and I wrote Inquiring Minds Want to Learn and, hopefully going to start writing more books. So it's kind of interesting because when I started doing the education quote consulting, I don't like that word because consulting kind of sounds very salesman-y and snake oilish. I like to say I'm a professional education specialist, which means that I provide service support. It wasn't an option or avenue. Back in the day, the ones who did that were the college professors who got book deals and turned their work into books. But then it started to become more of a avenue over the years. Now it's a pathway. I mean, I compare it to being like a social media director. Like 10 years ago, this did not exist. Now it's a pathway. So, I mean, I'm fortunate enough. I've been doing it for going to go on 13 years next year. And I just feel very fortunate and blessed that I can continue to do this and continue to evolve with what I do.
I think taking that step away from a full-time position is tough, and it's a big step. So, what gave you that confidence that you're going to be able to do moving from a school site administrator to this full-time?
Well, I was at the state education department at the time.
Oh,
I'm going to tell you honestly, Norman, I'll be very transparent. I was not a successful administrator. I was not ready to be and become the assistant principal I did become. And if anything, when I look at my experience as a school leader, boy, I am the perfect example of why people need mentors and why people need coaching because I really had no idea what I was doing, and I was asking more for forgiveness and having my mistakes held against me. And but glass half full, lesson learned. It made me realize that I did not want to be that school administrator that I thought it would be, because traditional pathway, what we do, we're classroom teacher, site administrator, district administrator, superintendent, maybe teach college. That was my pathway. And the lack of success I had was a blessing in disguise because I went to the state education agency, but it allowed me to learn a lot of things about education as a system. And consulting was never, ever, ever in my mind. Like right now, you hear so many people like, oh, I want to be an education consultant. Oh, I want to write books. I want to do this. And I ask people why. And why has become an overused term that, unfortunately has become superficial. But going through the process of Simon Sinek's why is very, very complex and deep. And you really got to figure out what your reasoning is. And in fact, I had to do that during the pandemic. And, you said it was tough to go from the position where you get paid every 2 weeks and it's a stable position to consulting. Tough is not the word, terrifying is, because you really have to have a plan. And I see a lot of people out there saying, I'll teach you how to do this. I mean, yeah, you could teach people how to set up their LLCs and you could teach people how to market themselves, but it's a mindset. I wake up every morning unemployed. That's my mindset. And my mindset is always wondering, is today the day that I have to go and drive for Uber or Lyft? Or is today the day that I should go get my sub certificate? And I don't look at that as a failure. I look at that as a pit stop. Like cars need to go and change their tires and get refuel when they're driving. But I then ask myself, okay, I got to go say to myself, I got to go get a job. I got to go find a job. I got to convince someone to hire me for a job, or I got to create a job. So that's kind of the mindset with it. And people need to know that this is hard and it's complex. And don't just look at what you see on social media, because you see the celebrations. I think that's the great thing about Angela Duckworth's Grit, that you see Michael Jordan, you see Oprah, but you got to really understand what it takes. And Michael Jordan missed baskets, and Michael Jordan was not able to get on his high school basketball team. And Oprah has to wake up every single day wondering if this is the day that it can just all fall apart or be taken away. And you have to understand that. And it's really just a mindset. So I would really, really caution people before they make this leap, before they go into this venture. What's your reasoning? What is that why you want to do how you do what you do? Go through the Cynic book and don't look at it and say, well, I want to make more money. That's a result. Or I want to travel. That's a result. Or I think teachers need this, or I think kids needs this, and I think the educate. That's your reason. What's your reasoning? My reasoning is to ensure that teaching and learning is standards driven and student supportive so that the experience is impactful, meaningful, and visible. And that's changed and it continues to evolve. If I went back to the classroom tomorrow, that would still be my reasoning, my why. And that's what I really think people need to look at. This is not an escape. This is not an avenue. This is an opportunity, but it is not easy. And people really need to understand that.
I love that you said how difficult it is to find your why, because there are times where I talk about my why and I will have teachers, well, my why is the kids. Well, why? Why is it the kids? And it becomes uncomfortable because they realize after we have those discussions that it may not be kids. It may be something deeper than that. And it takes time. And you and I were in the same pathway around 2020 is when I really started delving into that. And my why is with kindness, help people find solutions. Because as a teacher was about, kid focused. But once I came out of the classroom, that's not my focus necessarily anymore. So what is my why? It made a profound change in my mindset. And that's exactly what it is.
And that's what you really have to go through. And that's why sometimes I get concerned, because sometimes I see things out there and it's so overused that it loses its meaning and it becomes superficial. I mean, that's the meaning of buzzwords. we're all talking about science of reading right now, and the clock is ticking because it's going to come to a point where it's so overused and it's hard to not even just quantify, but qualify what it really means. That's even the thing about we're going to talk about today about DOK, depth of knowledge. Well, what exactly is it? And it's so overused. And well, I think I have an understanding of it, and I'm not sure if that's the understanding of it. And that's why I think we need to be cautious with that and to also be fully transparent. You're going to have days. I think Steve Jobs says some days you have your successes and some days build character. And you're going to have highs and lows, and you're going to have peaks and values. You can't be on top and you can't ride high. And to tell you the truth, a lot of times you can get so successful and so popular that you become resented, that people start saying, why are they so popular? And you start questioning it. So you really have to be careful about it. You can't just leap into it. It's not a solution. It is not an escape, and it won't solve your problems. You'll just have different problems. So that's why I think people, when they want to do this, do what we do. We do what we do not because it's was an escape or an avenue for us or a solution. We continue to do what we do because we're lucky, to tell you the truth. And there's a guy, his name's Gagne. He has a gifted and talented model where he says everybody has an innate skill, and innate skills become talents or learned talents based upon three things: heredity, which means we have the genetics for it or the mindset for it; environment, which means that we have an environment that is willing and welcoming for us to develop our skills; but also chance. When social emotional learning was all the rage, no one wanted to learn about DOK or questioning, so I had to shift but at the same time stay true to what you're why you are. That's what actually got me my why, because everyone kept on saying, "Oh, Eric, you're academic rigor. You're not social emotional learning." I was like, "Wait a minute. Through academic rigor, we can develop our social emotional mindsets and feelings, and social emotional learning is accomplishing and achieving learning at different levels of rigor. So why are you separating both?" And that's the unfortunate thing with education, is with that pedagogical pendulum. But again, I really put it out there cautiously, and people can go, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever, Eric." Or just listen to what I'm saying, is that this is not the solution, this is not the avenue. Before you make this leap, be strategic about it. Why do you want to do this? What's your reasoning? You can make a lot of money, but you also can lose a lot of money. You can make change, but you also can get ignored. So, what is your reasoning? What keeps you going? And that will make you successful.
Totally agree. It is a day-to-day process that every day you come in with a new growth mindset ready to go, and you're hoping that you're doing the right things to make that progress. I like that a lot. So let's talk about your work with DOK. You and I have talked in the past about misconceptions and misuse, but also some good examples of how people are using it in the proper way to create the rigor, to create what is needed in the classrooms. So talk to me, how did you start working with Webb's depth of knowledge? Where did it come from for you?
Well, I learned about it during my Common Core training. And that's actually when I started my career as a business venture, because I started around the years when Common Core was starting to be implemented. So I thought, wow, maybe I can be a Common Core trainer. Maybe I can train people on how to do this. And I always wanted to be an instructional leader with training. So I first learned about DOK in my Common Core training, and I really attached and really got attracted to the message that DOK looks beyond the verb. Because I always had a problem with, what does thinking look like, sound like, and feel like? What does that mean when we have to analyze? What does that mean we have to evaluate? Am I demonstrating higher level thinking? Yes, but how do I really know that I'm doing that? So I really like, that concept, that DOK look beyond the verb. So then we were given this DOK wheel that's full of verbs. And I'm a questioner, I wrote two books on it. And I asked, if DOK looks beyond the verb, why is this wheel full of verbs? And they kind of dismissed it. And I like to say, try to do a Jedi mind trick. Don't worry about it. This is not the droid you're looking for. Just use it. So I really delved into it. I got to meet Karen Hess. We were presenting at a conference, and I still talk about this when we went out to dinner. I was asking her about the history behind DOK and her Hess matrices, and she was asking me about what it was like to be a consultant. I just started that and started learning the history behind it. And I got to talk to John Walkup and Ben Jones, who also wrote the cognitive rigor paper, was with Karen. And then I got to talk to Norman Webb, who told me that the DOK really first started appearing in Florida with his work. And that's when it kind of got into this deep dive investigation for me about why is this thing inaccurate and understanding it and revealing it. So when I first started talking about DOK, I started talking about what DOK is, but then I started thinking creatively about what DOK could be. So what I did with it was I turned it into a method and model for teaching and learning, which is what people wanted it to be. And what I mean by that is that DOK, there's four levels. It's not a taxonomy. It describes four different ways kids can technically comprehend and communicate their learning, but I like to say demonstrate and discuss their learning. So when I say depth of knowledge is about what comes after the verb, and it's not about the type of thinking, you have to ask yourself, what exactly do the kids have to think or learn? Or how deeply do they have to demonstrate and discuss their knowledge and thinking or learning? So it's even evolved for me to where I'm looking at more so it's not even about cognition and content, it's about context. What exactly and how deeply do I have to understand and use my learning? And also, I've made a statement, I say the rigor's in the response. And the rigor comes from what exactly and how deeply do I have to respond? So lately, what I've been talking about with DOK is that at a level one, you just have to answer. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people have a hard time with that because, especially math teachers, well, that was a hard math problem. Yes, you're right. But if I just have to perform the operation or plug in an algorithm or formula, it's a DOK one. I can tell you 500, ask you what's 542 times 398. That's hard to do it off the top of your head. Or it's easy if you're able to do that. But here's where it gets rigorous. If I say to you, what is 542 times 398? And you tell me it's 215,716, don't be impressed because I have a calculator. If I can find it on a computer or do it on a calculator, it's a DOK1. But then I say to you, well, how did you get to your answer? Now I have to explain how I got my answer. So the thing I always like to say is this. So if I said to you, Norm, what's 2 plus 2? You would tell me,
4.
and I say, you're right, but why?
Yeah, then I had to get into number theory and understand it.
But the rigor is how do I explain that?
Hmm.
And I think that's the thing about rigor is that it's not just cognitive, it's communicative. And that is something moving forward in this world where we've moved from Google can attain the answers for us. That's a DOK1. Tell us the answer. Now AI can explain it to us in a language that's understandable. But we have to be able to take that and be able to communicate it and make it our own. So I can go on ChatGPT and ask, how can multi-digit numbers be multiplied using a standard algorithm? And it'll explain it to me. And I can even tell it to explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader.
Hmm.
And it'll explain it to me, but can I take it and make it my own? Okay. Can I take it and can I talk about it? So then you have a DOK3, which is all about evidence. It's about how can I justify and verify with evidence or consider, conclude, or critique based on evidence. And it's funny, Norm, even my thinking, because what I try to do is I try to meet people halfway. I try to say, if this is what you want and this is what you focus on, let me see what I can do to make this not simpler, because you can't simplify complexity, but you can make complex easy by through practice and through feeling. So I'm saying to people, here are the DOK verbs. Okay, DOK1 is answer. DOK2 is explain or express. DOK3 is justify or verify with evidence or consider, conclude, and critique based on evidence. That allows me to think critically and think creatively because considering is thinking creatively. So when you have science theory say develop and use a model, you're thinking creatively. You're considering how could you develop and use that model. DOK4 is explore and extend for an extensive purpose and period of time. Now, time's not a factor or a determinant or criteria. It's a characteristic. DOK4s you can't do in a single class setting. You can't do it in a class period. It takes hours. It takes days, weeks, quarters, semesters, years, multiple years. But how can we create those experiences? How can we take those four levels and use those four levels to create experiences? What I'm asking people this is lately is this. What are the four different ways kids can demonstrate and discuss their learning? They can either answer, they can either explain or express with examples using what they've learned or the information from text or the items in textbooks. They can use evidence to justify and verify or consider, critique, and conclude based on evidence, or explore and extend for an extensive purpose. What if we can make it easier by just saying these are the four expectations for learning? The other thing is, and I'm going to introduce this concept to you. So I heard about this guy. His name's Richard Feynman, and he's a scientist. And his whole thing is, how is it that people like Bill Gates and Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, can take all these complex concepts and theories and make it easier to understand, not simplify it, but make it easier to understand. So he talked about this thing, and I was just listening to an Audible where he talks about uh, serious play. And serious play is when you develop the depth of knowledge in a subject area, you've acquired the knowledge, which is DOK1, and you can apply the knowledge, which is DOK2. Now I have it. And DOK1 to DOK2, I'm going to call it hard work because it's hard to acquire the knowledge and it's hard to apply the knowledge. It's hard to answer and it's hard to explain. But what if DOK3 and DOK4 is serious play? And what I mean by serious play is now you have that knowledge. Let's play with it. Let's think strategically how and why we can use this knowledge. Let's use complex reasoning to justify or verify with evidence why something's correct or incorrect, or accurate or inaccurate, or uh, use complex reasoning to explain how this book addresses these themes and with evidence, or use or serious play to explore and extend. Now you know it and you've learned it in the classroom, you've learned it in this classroom setting. Now let's go and extend our learning. Let's go explore what else we can do with the knowledge. So that's something I'm actually looking at, and I'm introducing that to you right now. I just came up with this last night. That what if, yeah,
Exclusive.
what if I said, let's look at it from this perspective. DOK1 and DOK2 is hard work. It is hard to learn. It is hard to acquire knowledge, and it's hard to explain or express your understanding of that knowledge. But serious play is now that I have it, what can I do with it? What could I do with it? And what else can I do with it? And you don't have to start at a DOK1 to get to the DOK4. In fact, what I often suggest is start with the deeper DOK level. Treat it like a finish line. Say, this is the finish line in the race. And that's what I tell about DOK. It's like the DOK level is the finish line in a race. And each DOK level is a different race. So a DOK1 would be like a dash, get to the finish line. A DOK4 is a triathlon because you're using not just running, but you're also swimming and biking. You're going across the curriculum. A DOK2 or 3 is an obstacle course, and a DOK2 is a backyard obstacle course, but a DOK3 is American Ninja. And what I often do is, because I represent DOK as blocks, not a taxonomy, they're blocks. But then I'll go from the vertical um, presentation of it to a horizontal presentation of it, where I'll make the finish line be DOK1, DOK2, DOK3, DOK4. And then I have a graphic where I show there's a dash, there's a backyard blow up obstacle course, there's an American Ninja race, and there's a marathon, there's a triathlon. And I ask people, is that triathlon better than a dash? And they said, no, it's just a different expectation of a race. And I said, that's what I want you to think about with DOK. Don't look at DOK4 as better or ideal. That's good teaching. We are responsible to get the kids through the standard. That's doing our job. And we need to believe that all kids can get through the standard. We need to believe that all kids can reach the finish line. And that finish line is defined by that grade level standard, because that's what it means to demonstrate proficiency in that subject, in that grade, with that content. You need to believe that the kids can reach the finish line. It may not be in the time that we have, and it also not be may not be in the way that we teach them, but we need to figure out how they can reach that finish line. And it's really interesting, Norm, because when I see people, and this is actually in the gifted realm, and I'm going to really go on a limb with this. When I see gifted teachers who say, well, we need to teach gifted kids at a DOK4. No, you don't. They're already there, because that's extended thinking and reasoning. Well, DOK1 are also there too, because they can answer questions and they can solve it. But where gifted kids struggle is that they can't explain and they can't justify why they know why they know. So that's what I often say with that is that don't look at it as ideal. Don't value judgment it. Look at the standard. What exactly and how deeply does the student have to understand and use their learning to demonstrate proficiency, develop competency, or perform successfully? Start with that finish line. Teach like a track coach. Now, where are they on the track? Figure out where their strength is and figure out how they can use their strength to propel them to that finish line.
You made so many great points. I'm jotting down questions and follow-ups. I like the idea of play. There was actually a time where I was trying to consider the importance of play, and there's a lot of research out there about how important it is for people to play. But the idea of play for those higher levels is exceptional. And I'll take something from my childhood when we all knew the basics of baseball growing up. But when you have a neighborhood of 7 kids, how do you play a great baseball game? Well, you modify rules and you transfer your knowledge of what's fair and what's right within the structure of baseball. And it was
Mhm.
that whole idea of play then takes us to a different level because we had to make up our own rules. And anytime I went to a new neighborhood, the rules were different
Right.
because of the number of people and their own expectations. It's interesting to go that route with it.
And it's interesting you said because you're talking about your childhood. So that's an experience you had and you're taking it with you how many years later?
Right.
What I often talk about and use DOK with is to say, what is the experience you're providing for that child? So they take it with them, they take ownership of it. And it's not the exit ticket out the door. If you're just doing exit tickets out the door and you're not even looking at the exit ticket, you just throw them out. Then you're just wasting, you're killing trees. You're wasting paper. And what are you doing? And my focus is that how do I create this experience so it's not that you remember it for a test. It's not that you remember it for that assessment at the state gives you, that you take it with you for the rest of your life. And think about it. What kind of experiences are we taking? And that's a question I often ask is that I see a lot of kids engaged, but are they getting educated? I see a lot of kids on the devices. I have this thing where I actually just came up with, I call it the computer puss. And the older kids have it. They scowl at it or they get exasperated and they're just looking at screens. Are they taking it? Are they talking about it? Are they taking into consideration? Are they transfer it? That's DOK. Take it, talk about it, take in consideration, transfer it. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. That's also the effective domain of Bloom's taxonomy because you receive it, you respond to it, you value it, you organize it, and you characterize it. You take it in, you talk about it, you take in consideration, and you transfer it. So lately I've been asking, what if we align DOK with the wrong Bloom's taxonomy? What if we what if we've been associating it and it's not a one-on-one correlation. It's superimposed. That's what Karen did with it. That's how she made cognitive rigor. And it's also that argument. Remember what I said to you about my why? To ensure teaching and learning is standards driven and student supportive. So how can I get it to where the kids can take it and then talk about it and then take in consideration and transfer it? That's SEL. And that's how I say DOK is and supports affective learning. I'm not saying SEL because unfortunately that's become Fight Club. We don't talk about SEL.
Right.
Again, talking about bad branding and talking about buzzwords. So it's also funny because I tell people, I say, they talk about social emotional learning and they say, we can't talk about social emotional learning. And I said, well, we'll talk about effective learning and say, if you're ever accused, like, well, that sounds very social emotional. No, it's actually affective. Well, what does that mean? Well, affective is how we emotionally respond to learning. Well, that sounds social emotional. No, it's actually affective and it's research based. And actually, there's a Bloom's taxonomy. Would you like to learn a bit about it? So that kind of protects ourselves a little bit when it comes to that. So it's like we still can do what we want to do, but we need to protect ourselves. And we protect ourselves by understanding the why, understanding the research behind it. And that's something that I think a lot of people, and this is also the thing with DOK, is that don't just assume you know what it is and don't just read and say, okay, this says it's this, and we got this wheel from the state. You still got to look at it. And if you're asking yourself, this doesn't make sense, follow that thought. Because that's how I learned about DOK. Because when I got that wheel and I said, this doesn't make sense. And what I discovered about it is that it was uploaded to the internet by a teacher. Because what people don't know, and this is why people have a hard time with it, DOK was never meant to be an instructional model. It was meant to be used as a criterion for alignment studies. You would take your standard and you would code it like a rating scale, one, two, three, or four. And then you would take your assessment item and code it one, two, three, or four. And then you would see how closely it was aligned. That's why Norman Webb created it. In fact, I'll be transparent. Norman Webb doesn't think it's a method and model for teaching and learning. He disagrees with me. He also disagrees with Karen. But do we all agree it's about what comes after the verb? Absolutely. Do we all agree that we can't just look at the verb and say, okay, they're learning deeper? That you have to say, well, what exactly and how deeply? Tying in John Hattie's visible learning. What does that look like? What is the visible learning of it? And it's not so much what DOK is, it's what has become. And that's the thing I want people to really look at. Don't feel like you got to choose between Norman Webb's DOK, Karen Hess, the way she uses DOK, and my interpretation of DOK. Don't feel like you got to choose between us. Use them both and make it your own. And don't even fritter away your detail. Just say, okay, it's not about the verb. I know they're thinking deeper. Great. But what exactly and how deeply do they have to demonstrate and discuss their thinking? That's DOK. Norman created it for alignment studies. And I'm telling you right now, what I'm doing with it, that's me combating the teacher paid teacher AI issue. Just because I got off teacher paid teachers or AI produced it doesn't mean it's aligned to the standard. So I'm teaching people with that how to use it to determine whether that worksheet you got really addresses and assesses that standard. Karen's great at categorizing cognitive tasks with that Hess matrix where she can say, okay, well, what's the level of thinking? It's in that row. What's the depth of knowledge demanded? It's in that column. That's where it goes in the grid. But don't just say, okay, it went on to the right. It's not to the left, or it's towards the last three rows and not towards the top. Understand why it fits in that grid. With me, what I do with depth of knowledge is, as a method model for teaching and learning, is that what exactly and how deeply do the kids have to demonstrate and discuss their learning? And mine is driven by standards. And you use questioning and inquiry to get the kids to that DOK level.
That's that part of the misunderstanding of web that you mentioned, the wheel being one of them. After our discussion, probably about a year ago now, the web, the wheel, I took it to a school and they said, I told them, don't use the wheel. If you see it, don't use the wheel. And they go, last year that was pounded down our throat to use the wheel. So it was, they bought into my stuff right away just because I was different. It was one of those, that works well. But he also, if I'm remembering our conversation, levels really aren't levels. They're
Mm-hmm.
blocks, like you said. So talk about, and you've already touched on it a little bit. Talk about how they're really not levels; they're more of a block, and understanding how that could be used differently than stepping up one level to the next.
And it's interesting. And again, that's that shift. So the other thing I want to say is that how do we get people to shift their thinking is that you can't say you're wrong. Okay. And I get this with DOK is that, and I used to be this until I read Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And he characterizes people as either the preacher, the prosecutor, or the politician. And Norm, you know me for a while, and people who know me out there and they're listening to me. People know I have been the preacher. The DOK wheel is inaccurate. This is not depth of knowledge. This is what it is. And I've been sermonizing and shouting louder. And I get pushback. Boy, I got the evidence. I can tell you what state made that DOK wheel. I can tell there's a whole story behind how that DOK wheel got out there. And actually, I got a message from someone who worked at the State Department that put it out there and said, I want you to know we realized our mistake and we tried to fix it. I mean, I have the evidence, okay, and I can prove to you why it's wrong. I'm not good at being a politician because the politician is, okay, I get you don't like it, but how can I get you to like it so you like me and you accept me? That's not what it's about. It's about doing what's right for kids. And I really believe this wheel hurt people, and I really believe it's hurt education. And so when Adam Grant talks about thinking like a scientist and rethinking, and he talks about rethinking unlearn, and that sounds very, very uncomfortable. And even the concept of rethinking. So what I say is rethink and reconsider. So what I rethink and reconsider depth of knowledge as four different ways kids can understand and use their learning. The standard sets the expectation. Karen calls it the ceiling of assessment. That I know when I determine a DOK level of that standard, that's the deepest level the kids could and should be assessed. On an on-demand standardized assessment, they won't be assessed beyond it because that's unfair unless it's math. That's why we have the standards of mathematical practices. You have a DOK1 math standard, but if I have to model with mathematics or reason abstractly and quantitatively, now that's what makes the problem with DOK3. It also won't, the on-demand standardized assessment won't only assess at the ceiling because that makes it difficult. Assessment is not about did you learn it? It's about where you are in your learning. That's why I often distinguish. An assessment is diagnostic. Where are you in your learning so I can figure out how to reach you and teach you? A test says, did you get what I taught you? And you either did or you did it. Okay. So that's why I look at that. So with the four blocks, the standard establishes the criteria. This is what exactly and how deeply the kids have to establish their learning. Now we don't scaffold, but we tier. We use understanding by design to begin with the end in mind. And we use RTI to tier our instruction to where the kids are. So I have an example with math. A high school math standard to DOK3 is explain why the product of a non-zero rational number and irrational number is irrational. That's a DOK3 because I have to verify with evidence or justify with evidence, okay, or conclude based on evidence. Can you do that? No. Well, what is the product of a non-zero rational number and irrational number? You're looking at it and say, what word stands out for you? Product. What does that mean? Multiplication. Okay, we just tiered it down to third grade. So now we got to bring it back up. Go to middle school. What's a rational number? I don't remember. What is an irrational number? I don't know. Number that's not rational. Okay. What does rational mean? Now we're going to vocabulary, tier 2 vocabulary from elementary school. I don't know. What is irrational? Something that's not rational. Okay. What does that mean? I don't know. Okay. What's a non-zero whole number? 5, 2, 6, 4. What is a non-zero? But what is it? It's a number that's not zero. Good. Let's start there. Now we're in kindergarten. What can we do with that number? We create a class definition. We bring it up. I then ask you, what if I put a negative in front of it? Does it still meet the class definition? We say you can use the properties operations and get a concrete answer. You can count to it and get a concrete amount. You can measure it and find it on a number line. If I put a negative in front of it, does it still meet those rules? Kids go, yes. So what do we know about rational numbers? They could be negative numbers. So rational means the number makes sense. And irrational means the number doesn't make sense. What kind of number doesn't make sense? Guarantee a kid in your class is going to go fractions. Now I got to tear it back down to third grade. What's a fraction? 1/2, 2/3. Okay. What does that mean? It's part of a whole. What does that mean? It means I take a whole and I divide it. What'd you just say? Divide it. What if I told you a fractions division problem? You take the denominator and divide it into numerator. So give me a fraction. They may say 1/2. Divide 2 into 1. What do you get? 0.5. Is there any numbers after it? No. That's called a terminating decimal. That's what a rational number is. That's a mathematical concept. It can be expressed as a terminating decimal. I said, have you ever seen what I used to call, it depends on your population how you say it, I call it the devil's decimal or the devil's fraction. Because if I divide 3 into 2, I get 0.66666. Okay. That's called a repeating decimal or 8.33333. If the number, same number repeats, that's a rational number. Did you ever see a number that goes 3.14152? They go, yeah, that's pi. I said, that's irrational. If the numbers keep going and it's different. So if I say to you, what was your fraction? And I'll say negative one half. And I say, put a negative in front of it. Now multiply it by pi, excuse me. Multiply it by pi. Why would that product be irrational? Because pi is irrational. You just achieved the standard. Look how fast. That's what I mean. Start with the standard. Use the standard to find where the kids are. Don't look for the gaps, look for the strength. Build upon the strength so they can rise to, reach, and go beyond that bar. Now you have an experience where you can make it student-centered. And I say this in math where kids have to create their own problems and say, okay, I want you to create 20 problems. 5 have to be a whole number, 5 have to be a fraction, 5 have to be a decimal. Now, and 5 have to be negative. So now they're doing that. Now I want you to go and research what are irrational numbers and pick the irrational number and multiply it by your rational number and tell me why the products are rational. Remember I said experience?
Mhm.
That's what the kids take away.
Right.
That's how we use DOK with that. So each DOK level establishes what exactly and how deeply the kids have to demonstrate and discuss their learning. That's the finish line. Now I need to figure out where they are on the pathway to proficiency. Start where the kids are, begin where the kids are. Start with the standard, begin where the kids are, and build to, through, and beyond that bar. And when teachers say, I don't have time to reteach this, you meet them halfway and say, you're absolutely right, but they still need to learn it. So figure out where they are in their learning.
So the other statement that I want to go back to from your original talk on DOK was the importance of being able to communicate what you know. Um, how important is the idea of communication being taught consistently with other than ELA? How important is it to write in math? How important is it to speak in math and these other subjects to be able to demonstrate knowledge if for those topics? Because I think sometimes the non-ELA teachers will just let the kids get away with one word or two or sentence fragments to explain things because that's what they just want the answer. So how important is it to have those expectations to communicate more completely in a non-ELA class?
Essential and integral. Because what's happening with math students is happening with my cousin. He was a math genius. He could do the math. But then he got to college and now he had to discuss the math. And that is essential. I mean, answers come free in our world. When you and I were growing up, we got our answers from our parents, we got our answers from our teachers. And if we're lucky that our parents bought us an encyclopedia, that's also where we got our answers. We didn't question, we just took it because we grew up in a time where you didn't ask questions, that you did what the teacher taught you. And if you did it the way the teacher taught you, you got an A in achievement and also in conduct. I'm here in my office. I got my old report cards here. My mom gave it to me, and it's funny with the narrative. Erik asked too many questions. I always ask questions. Communication is essential because we take information. We're living in. It's funny because Neil Postman did this debate. It was on the AP exam about whether we've become the world that George Orwell wrote about in 1984, where information is suppressed, or we become the brave new world that Aldous Huxley talked about, where there's so much information out there that we don't even know what the truth is anymore. And everything is given to us. And it's also made us a little bit sedated in our learning to say, now I can go on ChatGPT and it can just explain it to me. And actually, I can just copy and paste it and put it in there. Communications, I don't want to know what you know. We need to have our kids tell us how they know, why they know, how they know, what they know, and we need to have our kids to explore and extend what else can they do with their learning. And we've lost that art of communication. It's really funny because we talk about the science of reading, but if you think about it, our kids are reading and engaging in literacy more than ever. When they're texting, that's reading and literacy. When they go on the internet, that's reading and literacy. The difference between when you and I were growing up is that literacy was considered to be print, but now literacy is multisensory. Kids can go and that's the other misnomer about the science of reading is that people think it's just about phonics and phonemic instruction. No, it's about not just comprehending the word, but it's also being able to read it and code it. It's understanding. So I'll give you an example. What I often do in my training is I'll put up my definition of depth of knowledge, or I'll put up Norman's definition of depth of knowledge, or Karen's definition of depth of knowledge. And I'll have a person read it out loud fluently, and the other person read it silently. And then I'll ask them, what is it telling you? What does it mean to you? What stands out for you? What are you not sure about? And what are you curious about? So now I'm taking it and I'm talking about it. And when I bring people back, I say, what stands out for you? Depth of knowledge looks beyond the verb. Okay, what does that mean to you? It means that I shouldn't just judge it based upon the verb. I need to look at the words and phrases that follow the verb. So what is it telling you? It's telling me that I don't judge the depth of knowledge demanded by the verb. I judge it based upon what comes after the verb. What are you unsure about? Well, does the verb have any kind of role? Okay, well, we have to look into that. What are you curious about? Well, what makes it different than Bloom's taxonomy? See, but that's the thing. Just because you can read and you can read fluently, when you and I grew up, I mean, we got into the higher reading groups because we could read fluently. We had phonemic awareness. But now it's about, do you understand what you're reading? Can you explain back to me what you're reading? Does what you're reading make you curious to want to learn more? And that's the thing. And also embracing the fact that text now is multisensory. Why is it that kids cannot understand the deeper meaning of Shakespearean sonnets, but man, they could tell you exactly who that Taylor Swift song's about
Right.
and which of her boyfriends she wrote that about.
Right.
And when
Immediate
she talks
inspiration.
about all too well and goes into 10 minutes and she makes these allusions, and the kid can say, oh, that's when, because the song's about Jake Gyllenhaal. Oh, that's when she's talking about that time she was at Jake Gyllenhaal's sister's house and she left her scarf there. Kids can infer. When you ever hear kids talk about Avengers Endgame, when Captain America finally got the hammer of Thor, the question they say, okay, could he only pick up the hammer now? Because in Age of Ultron, I remember it moved slightly. Or could he always have picked up the hammer? Or did he just earn the ability to pick up the hammer because he became worthy over time? Or did he choose not to lift up the hammer because he didn't want Thor to feel like he was not special? That's kids talking,
Right.
and that's kids engaged in it. So how can we get the kids to really delve into? We can take it. How can we get the kids to talk about it? Read what it says. What is that telling you? What does it mean to you? What stands out for you? What are you curious about? What are you unsure about?
Mhm.
Talk about it. And don't just do it by yourself. Talk it over with a friend. Let the kids speak. I like to say I know a deeper DOK level because it's the loudest room in the school. And it's the kids who are talking and they're on task. And the deeper the DOK level, the less you see the teacher.
Right.
So process it together, talk about it. I just came from a school in North Carolina. Oh my gosh, I'd never seen a think, pair, share from this. It was a teacher from the Philippines because a lot of schools are bringing teachers from the Philippines. She made this worksheet for think, pair, share, and she said, there was what evidence do you have from the text? What evidence did your partner get from the text? And how could you come up together to come up with a statement with evidence from the text both of you have? I was just blown away. I never seen that. I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I took the sheet. It was a teacher in Montgomery County schools, fifth grade, North Carolina, and they're reading Don Quixote, and she asked a question about what evidence states that Don Quixote was this. And the kid found the evidence who's responding to it, and another kid found their evidence, and they shared it together. And when they talked about it, the one child shared, and the other person wrote it down. And that's the speaking and listening standards, and everyone does that. So when I explain to you the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and the formula is what it is because it's half a square. Okay, in your own words, what did I just say? Talk, teach it to someone else. Now share it with the class because you hear me talking a lot right now. And I think sometimes that's that problem with teachers. We talk too much. And there's a reason why Charlie Brown's teacher sounds the way it is because that's Charles Schultz actually being satirical. It's not insulting. He's trying to change behavior through humor. Because what if I said that's what a child hears from 180 days? From the first day to the 180th day, the teacher sounds like wah, 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 wah. They can't distinguish it. But if they hear one of their classmates, Norm, if you explain it to me, that's what I remember.
Mhm.
And I take that with me. So Rick, Jen, and Rebecca Coda wrote a great book years ago called Let Them Speak. And that's what we need to have the kids do. Let them speak. We need to step back. Sometimes we're over teaching, we're over talking, and I'm like that too. And I have to remind myself two things. Number one, I say, I'm getting verklempt, like the Mike Meyer skit. I'm getting verklempt, talk amongst yourselves. What did I just say? Or I'm getting verklempt, discuss. That's my cue. That's when I know I talk too much. The other thing is, I have John Bon Jovi says this about his songs. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. Because if you sing Living on a Prayer, you're going to sing the verses like, yeah, we got to hold on to what we got. Because everyone
Right.
knows the chorus. Everyone knows the chorus. I halfway. That's the thing. We want the kids. Don't bore us. Get to the chorus. Put it out there. Let the kids talk about it. Let the kids form their own words. Let the kids write it down. And that's what they'll remember.
Well, your idea of talking too much, that's exactly the format that I try to give. So you can talk here and let people hear you, just so you have that format every once in a while where I expect you to talk. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
It is, but you know what, Norm? For what we do, I didn't realize this as a professional development person, is that when you talk too much, that sometimes you can turn off people.
Oh, without a doubt.
And it's like, oh, listen to that know-it-all. And I've been accused of that. Oh, he's a know-it-all. I mean, I'll tell you, even evaluations I get, it's never about the topic I'm teaching. It's attacks on my personality. And my mindset is, and I even talk about this in a keynote, where um, what we don't understand a lot of times is what do we trigger in somebody? And it might be out of our control. There was a book, it's an Oprah book. It's called What Happened to You? And it was a great story in there about the psychiatrist who was working with a child in foster care. And his brother and sisters lived in an abusive household, and the kids were in other foster homes, but he's in the foster care center. And he had this teacher, and he was just such a violent reaction to this teacher. They didn't know why. And the father came in, and the father was alcoholic. And if you remember growing up, a lot of times, what a lot of people did to cover that, to cover the alcohol on them or the alcohol in their breath, is that they wore Old Spice. Because you wear that thing is so overpowering. I mean, you can smell yourself coming from a mile away. Okay. So the father was heavy in Old Spice. And the psychiatrist, he was a psychiatrist, excuse me. And I always forget the name of the author. I apologize for that. It's called What Happened to You? Please read that book. He went to the teacher and he said, I'm going to ask you a question and just answer me. Don't look into why I'm asking it. What is the deodorant you wear? And the teacher said Old Spice. And he asked the teacher, what if you change your deodorant? And if not with every situation, just when you're with that student, don't wear that deodorant. And the relationship got better. See? So when I present, actually, and when I do a keynote, I call it, Are you ready to rethink? I actually, 20 minutes in after talking, I say, I've been 20 minutes up here, and I understand that a lot of people are probably feeling this way. I don't like you. And I say, I come into it, say, you remind me of my father, my brother, my husband, my ex-husband, my ex-boyfriend, my boyfriend. someone who hurt me, someone I can't stand, and a celebrity. What I say is, you remind me of someone who disappointed or hurt me. That's why I don't like you. And my job is to help you understand I'm not that person. The other thing is, I show a slide where there's a door and you don't know if you're walking in or walking out of it. And the question is, what happened before you enter this room? And what are you bringing into this room? So I'll ask people, and this is working with adults. I'll say, how many of you guys speeding ticket on the way here? How many of you guys something going on in your life? What if children are feeling that way? What if unconsciously? I mean, you and I remember a time we probably would say, you're the first male teacher my child ever had. Now it's, you're the first male influence my child ever had. Now, what if they had a negative experience with someone who's male, or maybe, their father's not in the picture, or maybe their mom's not in the picture. Maybe that's why, or maybe you remind them of their mom. And that's the big thing about that emotional response to it. So again, that social emotional part of it. And that's also why we need to be cognizant about how we present ourselves. So when I overtalk, I'm triggering feelings. I'm probably triggering some feelings in your audience, like, oh, they're doing whatever. It's not even that. It's because I'm triggering something, and I have to try to really be, empathetic of that and sensitive of that, and try to say, I'm not that person, and figure out how I can connect with you. And I think that's the other thing with teachers, and that's what DOK will do. It's not, what do I need to teach? It's, what do these kids need to learn, and how can I get them to learn it? So, and it may not be the way that I understand it, and it may not be the way that's in the textbook. And that's why I say teaching and learning is like a triangle, with the standard is at the apex and the curriculum and instruction are at both ends, and you use a balance of both. Because when you focus too much on your curriculum, you're not going to hit the standard. And if you focus too much on your instruction, you're not going to hit the standard. If I count on that teacher paid teacher worksheet, I'm not going to hit the standard. If I say, forget the textbook, forget the standard, I know what these kids need, I'm not going to hit it. You got to balance it out. Start with the standard, begin where the students are, and use your curricular tools and your instructional talent to get that kids, a balance of both, to get that kids to, through, and beyond that DOK bar set by the standard.
A lot of great points. And Erik, I could talk with you all day, but our time is about up.
No
Um,
worries. I understand that. And that's why I mean by pontificate. It's funny, a lot of times when people talk to me and they say, like, Eric, when you talk, you sound like Robin Williams in an interview, or Quentin Tarantino when you talk about movies. And I want to just basically express that I have such a passion for this profession. I believe that education is the greatest profession, and that's just not me talking rhetoric. I believe everything starts with education. I believe this can be the greatest profession. The problem is we're often bombarded by outside forces, and it isn't what it is, it's what you make of it. And don't make it about ourselves. It is not about Francis's DOK. I'll never call it that, or Francis's questioning. It's about DOK. It's about questioning and inquiry. How can I do this? This is why I got so many different interpretations. This is the technical stuff with DOK. These are the game show analogies. I've made board game analogies. I've even made food analogies. And I've even been so sensitive to say, if you're a meat eater, a DOK1 is ketchup, a DOK2 is steak sauce, a DOK3 is rub, and a DOK4 is you make your own steak sauce. If you're a vegetarian, a DOK1 is oil and vinegar, a DOK2 is ranch dressing, a DOK3 is cooked dressing, and a DOK4 is Newman's Own. So how can I get people to understand it?
right.
That's how I focus. And I hope people figure that out with teaching and learning.
Well, if you need to learn more about Erik's insight on education, you can see his books in the background there, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, and also Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, Posing Good Questions to Promote Student Inquiry. So check out his website as well, maverickeducation.com, and that's Maverick without a C. It's just K like his name, which I figured out after I looked at it a few times. I go, that's why there's no C in Maverick. I got it now. So maverickeducation.com. And please remember to subscribe to Educational Norm channel and contact me for information at norm@normpotter.com, or visit my website, Structured Creativity Consulting. And as always, until next week, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Thank you very much, Erik.
Thank you.